close-up of weathered stone tablets, their etched Hebrew letters dissolving into a montage of women's hands, writing, praying, raising protest signs. A haunting cello melody underscores the narrator's voice. Did the very language of God, etched in stone, silence half of humanity? What if the most sacred laws have been whispering a story we've only half heard? Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about the commandments as a groundbreaking revelation unfolds. One that will challenge your soul and redefine your understanding of the divine. Stay tuned until the very end for a story unlike any you've encountered. A speechless unveiling that promises to warm your heart and ignite your spirit. If you've ever yearned for a deeper truth, a more inclusive understanding of the sacred, then like, subscribe, comment, and share this unique journey. More heartwarming awakenings await. Stone speaks, doesn't it? These tablets, unearthed from the dust of millennia, whisper of a covenant, a divine ordering, but whose voice truly echoed in their carving. Was it the monolithic pronouncement of a patriarchal God, as some have claimed, leaving half of humanity in the shadows of its pronouncements? Or could these very commandments, seemingly etched in an unyielding past, pulse with a radical, untapped potential for a future where justice and dignity know no gender? Consider this. If the very foundation of our ethical understanding has been filtered through a single lens, a predominantly male perspective, haven't we been viewing only a partial truth? What sacred wisdom, what profound understanding of the divine will has been lost in the echo chambers of history, simply because the voices of women were deemed secondary, their experiences relegated to the margins? The commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," a cornerstone of human morality. But has its application been truly universal? How many women have been silenced, their spirits crushed, their potential extinguished, not by a swift act of violence, but by the slow, insidious erosion of their worth, their autonomy, their very being? Is not the denial of a woman's agency, the systematic undermining of her voice, a subtle but no less devastating form of taking life? And what of "Thou shalt not commit adultery," traditionally interpreted through the prism of male ownership and female fidelity? Does feminist theology not dare to ask, what constitutes true fidelity in a relationship of equals? Is it merely the adherence to a sexual boundary? Or does it encompass a deeper commitment to mutual respect, emotional honesty, and the honoring of each other's full humanity? Could this commandment, when viewed through a feminist lens, become a powerful call for relational justice, challenging all forms of betrayal, be they physical, emotional, or spiritual? Emotional or spiritual? Thou shalt not steal. We think of material possessions, of tangible wealth. But what of the theft of opportunity, the stealing of voice, the appropriation of women's labor, both seen and unseen throughout history? As the dominant interpretation of this commandment blinded us to the systemic injustices that have deprived generations of women of their rightful inheritance, not just material, but intellectual, spiritual, and social. These are not comfortable questions. They are meant to unsettle, to provoke a spiritual unease. For if the divine word is truly living and active, as Scripture proclaims, should it not challenge our assumptions, dismantle our biases, and lead us to a more expansive, more inclusive understanding of God's will? Feminist theology steps into this sacred space, not to dismantle tradition, but to excavate its hidden depths, to listen for the whispers of the marginalized, to reclaim the ethical traditions in a way that honors the fullness of human experience. Can these ancient commandments, once seemingly rigid and exclusionary, be reborn as dynamic principles of liberation, guiding us toward a world where the divine image, reflected equally in all, shines through with an unprecedented brilliance? Shines through with an unprecedented brilliance? The answer, perhaps, lies not just in the stone, but in the courageous and compassionate hearts, willing to reinterpret its meaning in the light of a more just and equitable future, re-examining the you, who is addressed. The very language of the law, etched, we are told, by the finger of God, begins with a you undeniably, unequivocally masculine, ata. For millennia, this single pronoun has stood, a silent sentinel guarding the gates of moral discourse. But what if this foundational you has been a subtle, insidious act of exclusion? Has the very grammar of divinity inadvertently cast half of humanity into a perpetual other, spoken to but rarely spoken with in the sacred dialogue? Consider the shockwave that ripples through centuries when we dare to ask. If the divine address was initially explicitly male, did it not subtly shape the very understanding of who was deemed fully capable of moral agency, fully accountable before God? Before God were women, by the very linguistic structure of the covenant, relegated to the periphery, their moral compasses calibrated by a secondary authority, their spiritual voices echoing only through the pronouncements directed at the men in their lives. The rabbis, in their wisdom, sought to bridge this chasm, asserting women's equal obligation to the negative commandments. Thou shalt nots, a crucial step undoubtedly. But does inclusion by proxy, as Haggith Sivan so astutely observes, truly grant women the fullness of moral subjectivity? Is being told what not to do the same as being empowered, as individuals, to actively shape a just and ethical world? Isn't there a profound difference between being included in a pre-existing framework and having one's own unique moral experiences and insights actively inform that framework? Think of the implications. If the primary addressee of divine law was male, did this not subtly reinforce societal structures where men were the primary interpreters, the primary enforcers, the primary beneficiaries of that law? Could this linguistic starting point have inadvertently contributed to the historical silencing of women's ethical perspectives, their unique experiences of justice and injustice deemed less relevant to the grand narrative of salvation? Then there is Paul's paradox, a shimmering beacon of radical equality in Galatians. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. A breathtaking vision of unity, a divine erasure of societal hierarchies. Yet, the subsequent pragmatism of his later letters, navigating the complexities of a patriarchal culture, has been a source of both comfort and contention. Did this necessary compromise inadvertently allow the seeds of inequality to reroot themselves within the nascent church? Feminist theologians dare to ask the truly unsettling question. If the Spirit of God poured out on Pentecost descended upon all, men and women alike, empowering daughters to prophesy alongside sons, then who are we to selectively amplify some voices while muting others based on the accident of gender? If divine inspiration knows no gender, should not our interpretations of the divine word reflect this radical inclusivity from its very foundation? What if the you of the commandments is not a static gendered pronoun, but a dynamic, ever-expanding invitation to all of humanity to enter into a direct and unmediated relationship with the divine? What if the centuries of masculine grammatical dominance have veiled a deeper truth? That God's call resonates within every heart regardless of gender, and that the fullness of divine wisdom can only be truly grasped when all voices are heard, all experiences are honored, and all are recognized is equally capable of responding to the sacred imperative. This re-examination is not merely an academic exercise. It is a spiritual imperative, a necessary step towards a more complete and just understanding of our shared covenant with the divine. Reclaiming the text, from suspicion to resurrection. For centuries, the sacred texts have passed through the hands of interpreters, each generation leaving its own imprint, its own cultural biases upon the parchment and the page. But what if the very act of interpretation has, at times, been a subtle form of gatekeeping, inadvertently locking away profound truths, obscuring the fullness of the divine message? Feminist hermeneutic steps into this complex legacy, wielding two powerful, almost surgical tools: a hermeneutic of suspicion and a hermeneutic of recovery. Are we brave enough to wield them ourselves? The hermeneutic of suspicion demands that we look anew at the familiar, that we question the seemingly self-evident. Have the dominant readings of Scripture, passed down through generations, truly captured the entirety of God's intention? Or have they been subtly, perhaps even unconsciously, filtered through the lens of patriarchal assumptions? Could the very interpretations we hold dear, the foundations of our theological understanding, be built upon a partially excavated ground, leaving vast, unexplored chambers of meaning lying dormant beneath the surface? Consider the 10th commandment in Exodus. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. Here, a woman is listed alongside property, an object of male desire. A woman is listed possession among possessions. A stark, uncomfortable truth. But then a subtle shift occurs in Deuteronomy. The neighbor's wife is elevated, listed separately, signaling a nascent, perhaps even revolutionary, acknowledgement of her distinct personhood. Now, the shocking question. For how long did the dominant interpretations of this commandment linger solely on the Exodus formulation, subtly reinforcing a view of women as chattel? How many sermons were preached? How many theological treatises written that inadvertently perpetuated this objectification, simply by overlooking or downplaying the significant evolution in Deuteronomy? What profound damage has been done to the understanding of women's dignity and inherent worth by this interpretive inertia? Feminist exegesis, with its keen eye for nuance and its unwavering commitment to justice, seizes upon this subtle shift in Deuteronomy as a thread to pull. It asks, what prompted this change? What nascent understanding of women's humanity was beginning to dawn within the ancient world, even within the patriarchal structures of the time? And what can this evolutionary trajectory teach us about the ongoing unfolding of divine revelation? The continuous call to a more just and equitable understanding of human relationships. But the hermeneutic of suspicion is only half the story. It clears the ground, dismantles the structures of ingrained bias. The hermeneutic of recovery then steps in, a meticulous archaeologist, carefully unearthing the buried treasures, the long-silenced voices that offer a richer, more complete tapestry of faith. Think of Deborah, a prophetess and judge leading Israel into battle. For centuries, her story, a powerful testament to female leadership and divine empowerment, has often been relegated to the dusty corners of the biblical narrative, a curious anomaly rather than a central example. Why? What unconscious biases led to the marginalization of such a potent figure of authority? What would our understanding of leadership, of divine calling, look like if Deborah's story had been given its rightful prominence throughout theological history? Consider Junia, hailed by Paul himself as outstanding among the apostles. Yet for centuries her identity was often obscured, her name masculinized by later interpreters, her apostolic authority diminished. What fear, what ingrained resistance to female leadership in the early church led to this subtle erasure? What vital understanding of the early Christian community, of the diverse ways in which the Spirit moved, have we lost by this act of interpretive silencing? And then there is Mary Magdalene, the first witness to the resurrection, the very cornerstone of Christian faith. Yet her pivotal role has often been overshadowed, her testimony questioned, her image sometimes distorted. Why this reluctance to fully embrace the powerful reality of a woman as the primary herald of the most transformative event in human history? What does this hesitancy reveal about our own ingrained biases, our own unconscious limitations in accepting the fullness of women's participation in the divine drama? These subversive stories, long relegated to the periphery, are not mere footnotes. They are counter-canonical proof, feminist theologians argue, of God's egalitarian heart, a divine impulse towards justice and equality that has echoed throughout history, even within the constraints of patriarchal cultures. They are the whispers of a different narrative, a narrative where women are not afterthoughts but active participants, not silent observers but powerful agents of divine will. The shocking truth is this: by neglecting these stories, by allowing the dominant, often male-centric interpretations to hold sway unchallenged, have we not been impoverishing our own spiritual inheritance? Have we not been impoverishing our own spiritual inheritance? Have we not been settling for a partial, incomplete vision of God's kingdom? Feminist hermeneutics invites us to a radical act of intellectual and spiritual courage, to question the comfortable assumptions, to excavate the buried truths, to listen to the long-silenced voices. It is not about discarding tradition, but about reclaiming it, about resurrecting the fullness of its wisdom, about allowing the divine word to speak with a clarity and inclusivity that reflects the boundless love and justice of its author. Are we ready to embrace this more expansive, more challenging, and ultimately more liberating encounter with the sacred text, rewriting the covenant? New commandments for new realities. Then commandments, etched in stone, have served as the bedrock of Western ethical thought for millennia. But what if the very tablets, however sacred, bear the indelible marks of their historical context, their silences as significant as their pronouncements, their silences as significant as their pronouncements? What if the unfolding story of humanity, with its evolving understanding of justice, dignity, and our relationship with the divine and the created world, demands that we consider, are there 11th commandments waiting to be inscribed, not on stone, perhaps, but on the very fabric of our consciousness? Consider the audacity of theologians like Diana Metzger, who dare to step beyond the Decalogue not to negate its wisdom, but to address the voids, the unspoken assumptions that have allowed injustice to fester in its shadows. Is it not a profound act of spiritual courage to ask, where does the ancient covenant fall silent on the pressing moral imperatives of our time? And what new pronouncements might be necessary to guide us toward a more just and compassionate future? Metzger offers a powerful starting point. You shall not conflate dominion with domination. The Genesis mandate to have dominion over the earth has, for too long, been twisted into a license for exploitation, a justification for environmental degradation, and the subjugation of the natural world. But what if dominion was never intended as domination, but as a sacred stewardship, a call to kinship with the earth, our shared home? Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si, echoes this ancient wisdom, reminding us of our interconnectedness with all of creation, a perspective deeply resonant with indigenous ecofeminism, which has long recognized the intrinsic value of the natural world and the crucial role of women as its protectors. The shocking question is this: has our failure to heed this 11th commandment, this call to responsible stewardship, brought us to the brink of ecological catastrophe? And can we truly claim to love our neighbor when we systematically destroy the very environment that sustains us all. Metzger's second proposed commandment strikes at the heart of centuries of exclusion and prejudice. You shall honor the image of God in all bodies. The theological assertion that humanity is created imago Dei, in the image of God, is foundational. But has our understanding of this profound truth been tragically limited by narrow definitions of gender, sexuality, and ability? Transgender theology, with its courageous exploration of identity and being, challenges us to see gender not as a rigid binary, a biological prison, but as a multifaceted prism, reflecting the infinite creativity and diversity of the divine. If humanity, in its totality, reflects the image of God, then who are we to deny the inherent dignity and sacred worth of those whose gender identity transcends traditional norms? A shocking question that confronts us is this: have our theological frameworks, often rooted in binary understandings of gender, inadvertently become instruments of oppression, denying a segment of humanity their fundamental right to be seen, affirmed, and loved as reflections of the divine? Metzger's final proposed commandment is a potent call to action. You shall covet justice. The traditional understanding of the 10th commandment cautions against coveting material possessions, a crucial safeguard against greed and envy. But what if the very desire that fuels acquisitiveness could be transmuted, redirected toward a higher purpose? What if we were called to passionately, relentlessly covet justice, to hunger and thirst for righteousness, as the Beatitudes proclaim? Movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too have erupted from a deep-seated yearning for justice, a collective refusal to tolerate systemic inequality and abuse. They are, in their essence, a reclaiming of the spirit of the 8th commandment. Thou shalt not steal, not just in its literal sense, but in its broader implication. The theft of dignity, the stealing of opportunity, the robbing of safety and security. The shocking question that these movements pose is this: have we, as individuals and as societies, become complicit in these forms of theft through our silence, our inaction, our failure to actively covet justice? These proposed 11th commandments are not intended to replace the Decalogue, but to extend its reach, to apply its timeless principles to the urgent realities of our contemporary world. They are a call for a dynamic, evolving understanding of our covenant with the divine, one that is not confined to ancient pronouncements, but resonates with the lived experiences and the pressing moral challenges of our time. Can we, with courage and humility, engage in this vital work of rewriting the covenant for new realities? Can we dare to imagine a theological landscape where stewardship is synonymous with kinship, where the image of God shines through all bodies, and where the longing for justice becomes a sacred imperative? The answer may not be etched in stone, but in the choices we make, the voices we amplify, and the future we strive to create. A future where the ancient wisdom of the commandments is not merely preserved, but translated into a world that reflects the boundless love and justice of the God who created us all. A liturgy of liberation. From pulpit to protest, the tablets of stone, weighty with the authority of the divine, offer a timeless moral compass. Yet time itself marches on, revealing new landscapes of human experience, casting shadows where light once seemed sufficient. Can a covenant forged in the crucible of antiquity fully address the complexities of our modern world? Or are we called to a courageous act of re-inscription, not to erase the old, but to illuminate the emerging contours of justice and love? Consider the very notion of divine command. Is it a static pronouncement, frozen in a particular historical and cultural context? Or does the Spirit of God continue to breathe through the ages, prompting us to a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the sacred will? If the living God is truly alive, shouldn't our understanding of the divine law also possess a dynamic, evolving quality, capable of speaking to the unique challenges and opportunities of each generation? Diana Metzger's 11th commandments are not acts of sacrilege, but rather bold attempts to listen for the echoes of the divine voice in the cacophony of our contemporary struggles. They are born not of a desire to dismantle the foundations, but to build upon them, to ensure that the ancient wisdom remains a living, breathing guide for a world grappling with unprecedented ethical dilemmas. You shall not conflate dominion with domination. This isn't merely an environmental plea. It's a radical theological reimagining of our relationship with creation. Were we truly given the earth as a resource to be exploited, or as a sacred trust to be cherished? Or as a sacred trust to be cherished? What if the groaning of a wounded planet is not just an ecological crisis, but a spiritual indictment, a testament to our failure to recognize the inherent sanctity of the created order? Could the rampant destruction of our environment be seen as a profound violation of a divine mandate? A modern form of idolatry where we elevate our own desires above the well-being of God's creation? And if so, what radical shifts in our worldview and our actions are required to truly honor this 11th commandment? You shall honor the image of God in all bodies. This is not just a call for tolerance, but a profound affirmation of the inherent sacredness of every human being, regardless of their identity or circumstance. If we truly believe that each person is a reflection of the divine, then how can we justify systems that marginalize, dehumanize, or deny the fundamental dignity of any individual or group? The emergence of transgender theology offers a powerful lens through which to understand this commandment. If God's image is reflected in the beautiful spectrum of human identities, rather than confined to rigid binary categories, then haven't we been limiting our understanding of the divine by our own narrow definitions? Could the struggles and the self-discovery of transgender individuals be a profound revelation, a deeper unveiling of the multifaceted nature of the Imago Dei? And if gender is indeed a prism, refracting the divine light in countless unique ways, what does it mean for our understanding of creation, of humanity, and ultimately, of God? You shall covet justice. This transforms a caution against selfish desire into a passionate call for righteous action. In a world rife with inequality, oppression, and systemic injustice, can we afford to be passive in our pursuit of what is right? Is not a lukewarm faith that tolerates injustice a contradiction in terms? The rise of movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too are not just social or political phenomena. They are deeply spiritual cries for recognition, for dignity, for the rectification of historical wrongs. They are a visceral manifestation of a hunger for justice that echoes the prophetic calls of Scripture. The shocking question we must confront is this: have we, as people of faith, been sufficiently attuned to these cries? Have we allowed our own privilege or complacency to blind us to the suffering of others? And what active, even disruptive, role are we called to play in coveting justices, in dismantling systems of oppression and building a world where righteousness prevails? These 11th commandments are not meant to supplant the wisdom of the Decalogue, but to engage in a vital dialogue with it, to extend its principles into the uncharted territories of our time. They are a recognition that the divine story is still being written, and that we are all called to be active participants in its unfolding. Can we embrace this challenge, this opportunity to rewrite the covenant for our new realities? Can we move beyond a static understanding of divine law and embrace a dynamic, evolving engagement with the sacred? The answer lies not in clinging to the familiar for comfort, but in courageously venturing into the uncomfortable truths of our time, guided by a love that seeks justice, a faith that embraces inclusivity, and a spirit that continues to speak in new and unexpected ways. The unfinished revelation. The story of the commandments is not a closed book, bound by the weight of antiquity. It is a living scroll still unfurling, its narrative enriched and challenged by the voices that have too long been relegated to the margins. Feminist theology does not seek to tear down this sacred edifice, but to shake its foundations, to disrupt the comfortable silences. Much like Jesus, with his radical love and unwavering commitment to the marginalized, disrupted the very heart of the temple. And is it not in this holy disruption, this courageous questioning, that a truer, more vibrant hope be found? An obedience not to the rigid letter that can stifle and divide, but to the living spirit that breathes life, that heals, that resurrects. For those who walk the path of established faith, consider this. Does your understanding of the divine narrative, your interpretation of the sacred covenant, have room for the raw, unfiltered lament of Jephthah's daughter, a young woman offered as a sacrifice on the altar of patriarchal ambition? Can you hear her voice crying out from the depths of injustice? And what of Hagar, the enslaved woman, cast out into the wilderness with her child, yet finding solace and survival through the unexpected grace of God? If these stories of female suffering and resilience remain footnotes in your theology, if the cries of the oppressed do not resonate within your spiritual framework, then what covenant are you truly keeping? Is it one that reflects the fullness of human experience, the breadth of divine compassion, or one that has been selectively edited, sanitized of the uncomfortable truths of power and marginalization? And for those who stand at the threshold of belief, those who seek meaning beyond the confines of traditional dogma, consider this. What if the voice of the divine is not a singular, thunderous pronouncement from a distant mountaintop, but a complex, interwoven chorus? The defiant whispers of midwives who chose conscience over the decree of a tyrant, the joyous shouts of Mary Magdalene as she ran from the tomb bearing the news of resurrection, the quiet yet insistent murmur of your own unspoken hunger for justice, for belonging, for a world where love and equity prevail, for a world where love and equity prevail. Could it be that the divine presence is not confined to ancient texts and hallowed halls, but pulses within the very fabric of human yearning for a better world? In the courageous acts of resistance against injustice, in the quiet moments of empathy and connection, imagine a new visual. Alongside the ancient Torah scroll, a modern protest sign held high bearing the simple yet powerful message, or hear her. And then both dissolving into the breathtaking beauty of a sunrise over the western wall, a symbol of enduring faith and persistent hope. This juxtaposition speaks to the ongoing dialogue between tradition and the urgent cries of the present, a recognition that the divine story is not static, but unfolds through the continuous engagement of human experience with the sacred. The Decalogue began with the powerful declaration, "I am the Lord your God." Feminist theology, in its profound reimagining, offers a response that is not a contradiction, but a deepening and expansion. We are her people, and is it not in this dynamic tension, this courageous interplay between the singular divine and the diverse multitude who seek relationship with the sacred, that a new revelation is born, a revelation that embraces the fullness of human experience, that acknowledges the voices that have been silenced, and that charts a course toward a more just and compassionate world. For all, envision a closing scene. Not the finality of stone, but the hopeful gesture of child, the inheritor of this evolving story, carefully adding a small, newly formed clay tablet to the original 10. Upon it, a single transformative inscription: you shall listen. This 11th commandment, born from the wisdom of feminist theology, is not about adding more rules, but about cultivating a deeper posture of receptivity, a commitment to hearing the voices that have been marginalized, perspectives that have been ignored. For true understanding, true justice, and true spiritual growth can only flourish when we open our hearts and minds to the full chorus of human experience, the crescendo of women's voices singing Hini Matov. Behold how good, how pleasant it is for us to dwell together in unities, fades not into silence but into a resonant hum, a lingering echo that invites us to join this ongoing song of liberation and love. This is the essence of feminist theology's transformative power. It bridges the chasm between ancient wisdom and modern cries for justice, not by discarding the past, but by reinterpreting it through a lens of inclusivity and compassion. It invites us to see the commandments not as immutable pronouncements from a distant authority, but as the starting point of a living dialogue, a dialogue that demands not just our compliance, but our voices, our empathy, and our unwavering commitment to creating a world where the divine image, reflected in every human being, shines brightly and without reservation. Call to action. Thank you for joining us on this profound exploration of the commandments through the lens of feminist theologies. If this journey into the often unheard voices within our sacred traditions has awakened a new understanding within you, we invite you to become part of a growing community, seeking a more just and inclusive spiritual landscape. Subscribe to stay connected for more groundbreaking theological reflections that challenge assumptions and illuminate hidden truths. Share this unique story, the whispers of an unfinished revelation, with those who yearn for a deeper, more expansive understanding of faith. And let us continue this vital dialogue together in the comments below. Your insights and questions are essential to this unfolding story. By engaging with this content, you become a part of a movement that believes in hearing all voices in the sacred conversation, like this video, to amplify its reach and help others discover these transformative perspectives. Together, let us listen for the spirit that resurrects, forging a path towards a more compassionate and equitable world.